Welcome in, everyone.
Hello, everybody. We have missed you all.
It has been a while. You've been gone.
I've
for a
been
little bit.
gone ever since Thanksgiving. Spent a lot of time with my family. It was very, very relaxing.
Yeah, I'm glad. And a lot has happened while we've been gone.
So much has happened.
Yeah. So this is Everything Sucks. Let's fix it. My name is Ben Mayer.
My name is Anthony Buono.
Today's December 5th, 2023, and we should probably get into a few of those things.
Yes, let's
Right?
start with a new development in carbon capture technology, which is something we've been very, very excited about and talked about a lot on the show so far.
Yeah, this one's cool. It was cool to see this come up on my feed because we talked about this, 2 weeks ago, right? In our most recent episode, I think. And a new carbon capture technology has been announced by a company called Graphite. Okay, that's Graphite with a Y. It's a startup that just came out of stealth mode, and it's backed by Bill Gates's venture capital fund that specifically supports climate change-based startups. So it has a process that is coming out with called carbon casting. The way that it works is it uses byproducts from wood and crops that would otherwise be left to decompose, and the company dehydrates those materials to kill the microbes that decompose them so they can use the materials. They compress the materials into really tight blocks, and then the blocks absorb CO2 in photosynthesis the same way that plants do, that all this organic material does before it starts to decompose. And so then those blocks are wrapped in this impermeable barrier so that none of the carbon dioxide can get out of it, and then they're stored underground. So this is a completely novel method. And part of the reason that it's really exciting, if it works, is it claims to remove CO2 from the air at under $100 per ton.
Wow, that's a huge difference from the other company we were talking about.
Exactly. Everything we've heard about before sees CO2 being taken out of the air at costs of around $1,000 per ton.
I think Heirloom at their best right now was like $650 a ton.
Exactly. So we're talking about a 6-fold plus reduction in cost. And this has always been one of the biggest obstacles that people have talked about when they discuss carbon capture. So it's really exciting. It stores carbon for over 1,000 years. And apparently they're ready to scale today and can do so without major obstacles. There are already companies that it has some of its first buyers. I forget, it was one of the major airlines, which we also talked about airlines being
Was it
big
Airbus
customers.
that was also doing this?
I don't think it's Airbus for this.
Okay.
It might be American.
Okay.
But as companies want to start offsetting their carbon emissions, companies like Graphite are going to get a lot of income coming in. So yeah, I think it's exciting.
No, I think, listen, the fact that it's coming from the venture capital firm pushed by, Bill Gates and stuff, that means that it's coming from a good place. We talk about all the time the danger of carbon capture is that it's going to be used by oil companies to offset their increases in oil production.
Yeah.
And that can't be the goal of carbon capture. Carbon capture must be to undo the damages of the past, not allow more damages in the future.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm happy to see it coming out of like a venture capital firm that has the resources it needs, because that means it's not going to get bought out by one of these oil companies. Because we talk about all the time, these oil companies will just swoop in and buy up these small carbon capture companies when they seem like they're making progress, and then kind of just put them into their larger evil empire conglomerate of earth and oil destruction.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm hopeful, at least. Like, you would hope that if a bigger company comes along and they're like, we want to buy you out, then maybe they go back to the Gates-led venture capital firm and they say, hey, we got this offer. Maybe they can find ways around that. Maybe they're not completely incentivized only by the profit motive.
Right.
We'll see.
Yeah,
Right.
because listen, carbon capture is awesome because of all the, there are tax credit involved for these things to make money. There are, companies have net zero goals that they need to meet. So they will be purchasing carbon credits from these companies. But the only way I think, and we talk about this again, for these companies to really become an integral part of our larger economic conversation is if we implement a cap and trade system.
Yeah.
Where, they are producing carbon coins basically that can be traded on the market and can, you can sell the right to burn 1,000 tons of carbon because this company is sucking 1,000 tons of carbon out.
Yeah.
So if they could sell that right to somebody else, that would make it even more commercially viable.
Yeah, exactly. And that'll be better in helping achieve our net zero goals, because then we can cap it at a certain amount of emissions and slowly bring that cap down to zero.
Right.
I'm good there.
I'm good there.
Cool.
All right, let's move on. We got some exciting housing policy.
Yes, we've got wins for YIMBYs. I saw this in a Bloomberg article recently. It's not one piece of news that particularly just happened. It's more looking at 2023 in general. And it seems like the YIMBY movement, and that's yes in my backyard, it's opposition to not in my backyard, for those of you who don't know. It seems that they've really gone national, and that's super exciting. There's a ton of states that have introduced bills or whole packages looking to tackle their housing crises and the housing crisis in the country at large, but with a lot of different zoning reform. So I'm just going to go through a few of those examples right now. In California, where you would kind of expect this thing to happen, Governor Gavin Newsom signed a package of 56 bills. These included reforms or extending existing reforms to make it easier to build accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and apartments. So that makes it easier if people have a bunch of property and want to build some additional homes off of it. That's what ADUs are. The allowing for more apartment building is a good counterbalance to the amount of single family zoning that has been present in the state for so long. It's also closed loopholes that localities used to block housing. One example that I really liked here was that a city's governing body could order additional environmental review for a development without specific cause, delaying projects by years, and one of these new laws closed this. So our first episode that we ever did, we talked about zoning reform. One of the reasons that these zoning laws ever came into place, I mean, there are a few reasons, and a lot of them have been racially motivated, motivated by discrimination, but another reason has been to protect the environment. And now these municipal level governments are abusing those environmental protection rules to delay home building processes and instead just keep property values higher.
Right. And we know now that denser living is more environmentally friendly.
Yes.
We know that it's not building more does not hurt the environment. We've learned exactly the opposite. Building more makes the environment, it makes us much more resilient to climate change, and it really lowers all of our carbon footprints, because when you're living closer together, you're walking to more places.
Yes.
You're taking more public transit. You're not utilizing cars as much. You maybe live closer to your job. These are all different things that when you live in a more denser environment, your carbon footprint goes down. So limiting the environmental reviews up front for these type of more dense housing production is the smartest thing they could do.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's perfect. And so nationwide, then we've seen over 200 bills to reform zoning introduced in at least 23 states, and that was just in 2023. That's huge.
That's massive.
And this isn't just blue states where this is happening. One of the states which passed a big zoning package was Montana, which is a very red state. Migration into Montana has been sharply rising since the onset of the pandemic, and so the government wanted to get ahead of that to prepare and not have its housing market kind of overrun. So this package legalizes backyard ADUs, it allows apartments in commercial areas, and a ton of other zoning reforms to make it easier to build there.
In Montana, it's so interesting because there is a real strong libertarian movement in Montana. And libertarians in the Montana House, and even the more libertarian side of the Republican Party in the Montana House, sided with the Democrats in the Montana House to get a lot of these things passed. It was a real bipartisan effort here where Democrats and Republicans both agreed.
Yeah.
And there are some speeches that you would hear from some people in the House, in the Montana legislature, and you think like, oh man, that guy made a lot of good points, And then you look him up, and he's a Republican. And, there's a lot of other things you would disagree with him on. At least I would. But on this one, he's dead to rights.
Yeah. I feel like ideologically, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for Democrats and Republicans to be split on housing. Republicans, you think about, is the free market party, right? Restricting a bunch of housing building doesn't fit into that bucket.
No.
So it really, what makes more sense is property owners, old property owners versus young renters, right? That's where the split lies, and there can be Democrats and Republicans on either side of that divide.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. I think like also there's a dichotomy between free market liberalism, like a libertarian or white right wing economist belief, right, and conservatism and reactionaryism, right? Being a reactionary, conservatism, I don't know necessarily dictates believing in a free market solution. Conservatism just means conserving what's present.
Yeah.
Right. So if our local community is a single family zoning place and we don't have any duplex or triplexes and we don't have public transit that runs through our community, they want to conserve what's currently there. Mm-hmm. They don't want to change it.
Yeah.
And in this case, the free market, in the national level, the free market is the ally to conservatism because that is what we basically currently have.
Yes.
But at these local levels, when we have these, structures of poor zoning laws and overbearing environmental regulations that really aren't good for the environment at all, that's where the free market and the free market side of right-wing economics and stuff allies with capital L liberalism pretty good.
Yeah, it pushes for change rather than staying the same.
Right.
Totally. And so there are a bunch of other states. I said 23, but just to show you kind of the range of the political spectrum that they cover, Vermont, one of the bluest states there is, Texas, Rhode Island, Florida, Arkansas, Ohio, North Carolina, Washington. It's all over the country, all across the spectrum. YIMBYism really is winning out. It seems we've talked about unions having a moment right now. It feels like the YIMBY movement is having their moment right now as well.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really exciting. There were some failures, some pretty high-profile failures. New York, Arizona, and Colorado saw some partisan squabbling and resistance from the rich suburbanites, as always, preventing anything from passing, anything substantial. But the general consensus here is that this is a big step. What we've seen with the union movement, right, is that it starts somewhere. It starts with UAW and the big three, and then they decide that they're about to move on to the big five, the big six, and more. I think that's what we're seeing with the YIMBY movement as well.
Yeah, I want to comment on two things. So in New York, how it fails, right? It's interesting because my parents are Republican, and they are definitely anti-Kathy Hochul, who was the governor of New York. But Kathy Hochul's plan had so much resistance from rich Democrats, like so much resistance from rich suburban Democrats, and she couldn't find a coalition to make happy. She could not rally enough working class people to support this type of zoning reform that would offset the damage being done to her base pretty much in suburban areas in New York. So that's one example where Democrats shot themselves in the foot and are hurting our housing supply. New York has the room and it has the best transit system in the country. If there's any place where we should be building more affordable and more housing, period, near transit stations, it should be in New York.
Yeah.
We have so many Long Island Railroad stops, and each one of them should come right next to an affordable housing unit. More zoning, laxer zoning requirements. So we have triplexes, duplexes, multifamily housing right there.
Yeah. Totally.
And then the last thing is I want to talk about, what's been going on in Massachusetts with regards to zoning, because last year or so, they passed the MBTA Communities Act, which means that communities that are on the MBTA public transit system of Massachusetts are required to zone for an additional 7,000 units or so. And the type of zoning is very, very specific. Like you have to be the right to build, that these companies and developers have the right to build on this land. So there aren't many, things that the local government can do to stop and slow down the development of these projects. Now, And the MBTA-CA has been very controversial in a lot of towns across Massachusetts because each different locality affected by the act has to pass their own plan on how they will compromise with it. In Brookline recently, we just passed a plan in which we will be compliant and also have very, very meaningful development along the MBTA rail system here. So really good stuff. We zoned for like 2,000 more units.
Yeah.
And those will all be, built over the course of a decade and a half. So it's good.
Yeah, very exciting.
It's really cool. All right. Now, sticking on the topic of homelessness, let's go over to the state of Nevada. Now, Nevada has implemented a very, very interesting anti-homelessness solution here that I think it's definitely important we talk about, go through the pros and cons, see how it's effective, and kind of hear some feedback from the people who have gone through it about how they feel about the experience they had. So in Nevada, they are starting to build Nevada care camps, and these camps accommodate about 600 people with individual sleeping pods. It's like, imagine just a bunch of 6-by-6-foot rooms out in like a deserty area where homeless people can go and have shelter. Already sounds a little fucky, right? Does that sound like a prison?
A little dystopic.
Sounds a little dystopic.
Yeah.
But the homelessness living on the street has plummeted in Reno, Nevada. So it has gone from 780 people around to 329, which is a 58% drop in homelessness.
That's huge.
That's huge, right? So that's huge. Mm-hmm. So once the people are off the street, it isn't just like an emergency housing situation. The city has organizations and partners in this campus that help people find jobs and help get them permanent housing. There has been Republican and Democrat mayors that have looked at this example and have seemed to like it as a development. The Republican mayor of Anchorage, Alaska, is having problems with homelessness right now. And with the coming winter, he would like to do something similar to this to get the homeless people out of the cold.
Yeah.
Now, liberals are afraid that the system is a little bit too prison-like. I don't blame them for that. It's definitely spooky.
I would only call it prison-like, though, if their movement is restricted. It's not
so they do have intense restrictions.
They do have intense restrictions, but it's not like they come here and then can't leave.
Right. If they come here, they are very, very able to leave. If you go there, you can't do drugs. You can't bring in alcohol. You can't get any visitors. No one can come and visit you. You can leave, but no one else can come into the campus. It honestly, it sounds like to me like it's doubling as a rehab facility and a homelessness facility.
Yes. But that's hard, right? Because if it's a rehab facility, then you need people helping with the rehabilitation. Like, rehab facilities aren't just places that you go to not do drugs.
Right. You can't have the situation where a bunch of homeless guys who are addicted to heroin go in and go quit cold turkey in the middle of the desert.
Exactly.
Right? That's not healthy.
No.
So there are definitely problems with this, but this is how they're setting it up so far.
So I'm curious, do you know or do you think the reason that they don't allow visitors is because these people can bring drugs?
That's exactly why. Okay. They don't want any visitors because they don't want anyone sneaking drugs into the camp.
Okay.
One of the big pushes for Reno to do this was because the judicial system in the United States rules that towns can't take down homeless camps if there is no state assistance to get them beds in the meantime.
Yeah.
So U.S. court, you are not allowed to just go in and wipe a camp off the map in some street in the middle of L.A. unless the L.A. government has beds in another place for these people to go. Mm-hmm. They said that they deemed it was too mean, it was too cruel.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a W for the justice system of the U.S. To be honest.
Totally.
So Reno, since this happened, they offer all these beds. Now Reno can go in, clean up a lot of the camps, and say, "Look, we have the beds for them if they want to go." Mm-hmm. They have another option. They don't have to be on the street right now. They could come to these beds.
Yeah.
Now here's one example of a guy who went through the system. His name is Jorge Ramirez Morhe. He had been on the street for about a year, and when he moved into these cities in Reno, he had a really positive experience. The system there helped him end up getting a job, and now he rents his own apartment, still tiny, 8 by 8 feet, but it's his own apartment.
Wow!
And he's able to afford, a $500, $550 a month rent in Reno, Nevada.
How the hell is an 8 by 8 foot room in Reno $555 a month?
Because this country is fucking broken, bro. That's how.
That's crazy.
An 8 by 8 room is $555 a month. God, we're so fucked. God, we're fucked.
Oh my God. That's barely room for a mattress.
Yeah. Dude, that's really bad. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. That's really bad. But Jorge describes the camp as saying it's like having someone on your side helping you in the most difficult time of your life. If that's the overall sentiment of the people going through this process, I view it very positively.
Yeah, we don't know that it is.
We don't know
at all. This is the one person.
This is the one guy who got interviewed.
Very clear.
It could have been like fucking 90 other people banging on the doors that were locked in there.
Yeah, this is usually the problem. Quick side note, because I always have to do this with like articles, is that they find any person that can give them a quote for either side.
Yes.
So you know that both sides exist, but you don't know what the distribution of people on the sides is.
Right, because listen, these news articles aren't studies.
No.
They're not designed to be studies. They're not controlling for factors. They're not looking at it quantitatively. They're not, so they're just going in and trying to get a good soundbite.
Yeah, they're looking for a story, and it's a better story if people feel either way.
Yes. Now, this stuff obviously isn't free. The upfront cost to build out the campus was $17 million, which first thing I heard that is cheap as hell. You're telling me it's $17 million to make these 600 rooms with all these beds and cut your homelessness by 58%?
Yeah.
For $17 million
That
bucks
is super cheap.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So now they want to expand the services. So they do want to add a healthcare clinic to the campus. They want to add other services. And then eventually the total cost of the campus will be $80 million. Again, still cheap.
Yes.
To be honest.
Relatively. Although we are only talking about one city.
Yes, this is one city trying to deal with a homelessness population of around 800 people.
Yes. So it's one city with a small population. I mean, think about it. 80 million for 800 people. That puts your total at about 800,000 or 100,000 per person.
Right.
Which isn't super expensive.
Right. It's not, because if you think about all the policing that has to go into dealing with a homeless person, right? If the homeless person ends up going to jail, that's a big cost on the tax base, right?
Yeah.
So.
And of course, the economic gains that you get by having this person pay for their own home and have a job.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a really positive development. In my view, okay, the Washoe County Commissioner said that the Washoe County Commissioner came out against this policy, and he said it was basically a whole bunch of waste of time and money. He said that there is no demonstrated ability for this camp to do anything more than get people off the street temporarily. It goes against the anecdote of Jorge that we talked about.
Yeah.
The Washoe County Commissioner is a very, very, he's a pretty Republican guy, and he doesn't really view rehabilitation as kind of a possibility for a lot of these homeless people. He thinks he just doesn't think that, any type of job assistance will actually make an impactful difference to get them back in the labor market.
Okay.
I don't agree with him, but I could see if I don't know the results yet of how this affects permanent housing. So I don't know if I could totally dispute his claim there.
That's the thing. I'm hesitant to speak on it at all because this is a pretty new kind of experiment that they're running, right? This isn't something that's commonly run in different municipalities around the country. So who knows?
Yeah. And listen, I think this is a worthy experiment to keep trying, but it's not a silver bullet.
Yeah.
Like we said, there are strict rules with drugs, alcohol. Now, some homelessness people in these communities did say it felt like they were in a prison, and this is people who were interviewed on the scene. These homeless people did say that it felt like they were in a prison, but they were struggling because they still were happy and safe. And so they had this weird thought process in their head, like, yes, I feel a little bit like I'm in a prison. I feel like my rights are being a little restricted. But on the other hand, it's like I have food, I am safe, I am happy. And you have to think about it, being a homeless person, it's really hard just to feel safe. You're constantly at the threat of violence consistently by homeless people, by the state. You're always in some type of fear.
Yeah.
And to having a place where you just kind of feel like you can put your shoulders down and relax for a second.
Totally. Yeah. And homeless on homeless crime is like the most common type, right? Because who is more desperate? Who has more to gain by stealing from another person, specifically who's going to have probably less pull in the legal system or is going to be less likely to engage with it.
Right.
So,
yeah. People have found that it's a little difficult to convince homeless people to go to the center, but anti-poverty advocates in Reno, Nevada have been trying really hard to get as many homeless people to go to the center as they can. So the anti-poverty movement in Reno seems to be behind it, even though some liberals were initially against it, calling it prison-like. But it's a really interesting development. It's a really frontline way of tackling homelessness. It's a very, state heavy, large operation to do what you can to fight homelessness.
Totally.
You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's hard because there are so many people who are going to be like, there are different solutions. There is no silver bullet. This is something that will help a lot of people, but there's still 329 homeless people staying on the street for a reason, right? And the more variety you need to introduce into your solution, the more expensive it is, the harder it is to implement.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's go over to the other big story with COP28.
Okay.
We have international climate negotiations going on here, people.
Yes.
And we have some interesting results coming out. So the first thing that the United States has been talking about, their big commitment coming out of COP28, and really what they're pushing on the rest of the world stage, is cutting millions worth of methane emissions, millions of tons of methane emissions. So now the federal government, under a new Biden regulation, will work for the first time to require oil and gas producers to detect and fix leaks of methane in their oil drilling operations. Now, methane is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. I'm pretty sure it has 10 times the absorption rate of carbon dioxide. If it's not 10 times, it's something up there.
Yeah.
It doesn't last in the atmosphere as long as carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is there for like 100, 200 years. Methane's more like 5 to 20.
Yes.
So it's not as long lasting, but it dangerously speeds up the rate of global warming as it continues to get put into the atmosphere through these leaks in the drilling equipment. Now, the United States is going on the front lines of that. This is going to be really interesting because the United States, it might not be thought of like this, especially like we always hear how expensive gasoline is and stuff in the United States, but the U.S. is the largest oil producer in the entire world.
Yeah.
We produce almost twice as much oil as Saudi Arabia, if not twice as much, like 33% more or whatever, 50% more than Saudi Arabia. So a lot more oil. We're producing 16% of the world's total oil supply. Saudi Arabia is producing 11% of the world's oil supply.
It's just wild because that's not our story at all, right? Like the stories resonate so much about what OPEC decides to do with its oil production and the prices that it puts. So it's wild to kind of get that reality check.
No, I know. It's so interesting to look at this chart and think, like, oh, wait a second. Wait, let's look when Biden took office. Oh, wait a second. Our total share of oil production has gone from 14% of the global supply to 16% of the global supply.
Yeah.
I thought Biden was crushing fossil fuel production. Wait a second. It's grown dramatically since he took office. Like, it's so hard to
reconcile.
But now, since we have such a large percentage of this, if we take the step of regulating these companies to control their methane leaks, that could have a massive positive impact very, very quickly, since so much of the oil is getting produced here at home.
Yeah, it can. It will help with methane. I heard one perspective on this that's like the U.S. generally has been in a good position because it's kind of, we just have to keep cleaning up our act with the oil production. So rather than like for crude oil production, it's not that we have to we will have to stop doing it, but in the meantime, we just have this methane waste product that's kind of been like, we have better ways to do the oil extraction that we can take on. So it's not that hard to transition to them. It's just that we have already existing methods and infrastructure in place that hasn't been taking care of the methane. And methane can actually be used as fuel, like it can be recycled as fuel on its own.
Right.
So we actually we significantly benefit by implementing this kind of policy.
No, for sure. Now, the God, I was going to say one more thing about this, but I don't remember.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. So now, in addition to fighting, this is what I was going to say. The oil industry is obviously furious at Biden and his administration for doing something like this. They are already saying that it's going to curb their ability to produce, and it's going to curb their, resilience and agility to handle international oil market shocks, because now they're going to have to take into account all these different regulations and all this. I just don't buy it. I don't believe them. It's obviously going to be an added upfront cost, but I think that they'll be able to manage just fine.
Yeah.
I'm not really concerned. I just think it's, it's corporate blustering. So
yeah, I think so too.
yeah. Now, What now? COP28, the U.S. has also pledged $3 billion to climate funds that go into building climate resiliency in poorer nations. This is a huge deal too. We always talk about how the developed nations that built their economies off the backs of fossil fuels, of carbon dioxide, have at least some obligation to assist the third world and the developing world with getting their economies resilient against the climate shocks that are coming because of our pollution, and growing their economies into green energy hubs and developing them past the point of needing fossil fuels.
Yeah. I think my thoughts are mixed on this, not as far as it's are judging on how good of an idea it is. Obviously, it's a good idea to fund resiliency in poorer countries, but as far as like building out the infrastructure for energy development, energy production in poorer countries as well. The funny thing is, a lot of these poorer nations, they want to build renewable.
Oh yeah,
because they know renewable is cheaper over the long term. Like there's really if you're starting from not having that much of a built out energy infrastructure, it's a lot better to build renewables. The only issue is the capital lies with the oil producers, with the gas producers, right? So they can sacrifice some of that upfront cost, and they can go into those poorer countries and say, hey, we'll offer you these huge discounts to start out so that they can establish their infrastructure there, which is why something like this is needed from the U.S., right? It needs to kind of balance it out from the U.S. and other rich countries.
Yeah. Now, Brazil is doing some investing too to help restore some other carbon sinks, right?
Yeah, this was a big thing that Brazil announced. They are investing $204 million into restoring the Amazon rainforest, which is really important. The country, so they're looking to restore land the size of Latvia. It's like hundreds of thousands of square miles.
That's so interesting. Latvia is a unit of measurement.
Yeah, I know. It was weird, but I kind of liked seeing that in the article.
I love that.
Part of this will also mean it will include removing 1.65 billion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere by 2030 based on planting all of these trees. There's a fear and a pretty popular theory from a Brazilian environmental scientist that the Amazon is really close to this tipping point where it's been facing drought because of climate change and because of having so much of the forest cut down, that it's not only facing drought, but a lot of the vegetation is dying off because the ecosystem is being affected so badly that it could die out and become a savanna rather than the rainforest it currently is.
God, that's out of a nightmare.
Yes, which is completely terrifying and would set us back that much further in the battle against climate change, not to mention just what it would do to the ecosystem and everything around it. So the calls to reforest a bunch of the Amazon have gotten louder and louder as it's been feared that the tipping point becomes closer and closer. So yeah, I have on here, it's estimated that 270,000 square miles need replanting to avoid the tipping point, which is obviously a big ask, but clearly seems warranted given the risks.
And it seems they have the political movement right now. Lula da Silva is the president of Brazil at the moment, and he is like a part of the Socialist Labor Party there, and he is a strong environmentalist advocate. This is one of the big things he ran on against Jair Bolsonaro in the election a few years ago. Jair Bolsonaro, the previous president of Brazil, was cutting down the rainforest at one of the fastest rates we've seen, really expanding it for cattle farming, for oil drilling even, or something like that. But Lula da Silva comes in, all that stuff stops. The replanting has gone up exponentially. And now we have this other investment where we're going to see even more replanting. So I think the rainforest is in good hands with the Brazilian leadership right now, and Lula isn't up for election in a while. So
yeah, that's good. They just have to be fast.
Yeah.
Because droughts are getting worse as climate change keeps doing its thing. And so the one other thing I wanted to talk about was this report that came out at the same time as COP28 on greenwashing. And this is kind of interesting to me because it's a really niche area, but it's one that will affect the green transition pretty significantly, I think. So this organization, IOSCO, noted that most jurisdictions don't specifically define greenwashing in legally binding provisions. So what is greenwashing, right? It's when companies or organizations report that their practices are more sustainable than they actually are, right? So it's misleading to consumers a lot of the time, but because greenwashing isn't defined by governments, they can get away with it, and it's not really a problem. So there are a couple ways that companies do this. They're called green bleaching and green hushing. Green bleaching is when asset managers play down their sustainability credentials to avoid regulatory requirements. So it's like, even if companies have certain ESG requirements that they slap on themselves to look good to their consumer base or to their investors, they play them down to governments when they send reports or they report on their earnings, so they don't have to follow certain laws. And then green hushing is underreporting sustainability credentials to those investors to avoid investor scrutiny and to avoid kind of higher expectations in how they transform in the green transition. So this is, I don't know, it's interesting to me because it suggests there's this area that governments need to start focusing on where they get really specific about which companies are following the guidelines they lay out for the behaviors that they need to qualify for the trillions of dollars of incentives and tax credits that are coming their way as governments try to speed the transition up.
Right. So now all these companies, if they're green bleaching, if I'm understanding this right, they're going to be green bleaching so that the government thinks they need more tax credits to meet their carbon reduction goals?
More so, they're going to be green bleaching. They're going to be green bleaching so governments aren't concerned about the effects of their operations on the environment.
Gotcha. Okay. During my first internship, I worked at an investment bank for my first internship, and one of the first projects I was on was helping my manager pick which ESG rating software would be used by the company.
Yeah.
That was one of my first assignments. And when we were doing these demos, it was very, very new. I mean, I got in there, I think I was 20. And so ESG was just becoming a thing, and the tools that they were using were not great. They were using basically Python scripts and web scrapers to go through the internet and take out every news article that was related to a company and then pull out keywords related to green energy policy, related to diversity, related to all this other stuff, and then give it a score based off the number of occurrences of that word per article written about the company.
Yeah.
That's how they were making ESG scores. So it's not a well-regulated environment at all. These ESG scores and the methodologies of all these different ESG ratings are so vastly different from company to company.
Exactly. And it's super informal, right?
Super informal.
And so one of the solutions that they suggest is let's have planned climate-related corporate disclosures where there's a specific list of, okay, you have to say how many fossil fuels or how much were your emissions in each of your different operations.
Yeah.
Right? What does that serve in your company? So that it can be available to the government so that they can know who to provide incentives to, and available to the public so that they can know who they want to buy from based on that information.
Totally. The same way the company needs to release their assets, liabilities, liquidity, all that stuff, they need to release their carbon process, their carbon emissions for each step of their production process.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have good progress against the war on tax cheats. U.S. courts are going after hedge funds for tax evasion. Technically tax evasion. It's complicated, but I'll try to do my best to summarize it. So a U.S. tax court ruling could require managers to pay self-employment taxes, which would increase their taxes by more than 3% on much of their income. 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're making your money based off of investments, 3% is a shit ton of money. So the main phrase here that needs to be emphasized is pay self-employment taxes. So currently, hedge funds use this popular technique by identifying their employees as limited partners. So limited partners don't have to pay self-employment taxes as they are not technically active members of the business. Now, self-employment taxes operate as a part of the payroll taxes. You pay these all the time. When you pay your Social Security and Medicare taxes, you pay that normally, but when you're self-employed, you have to pay not only the business, your personal portion of the payroll taxes, you have to pay the business portion of the payroll taxes. So in this case, they're only paying, as a limited partner, they are only paying their personal side of the payroll tax. They're not paying the employment side of the personal tax that they should be paying as somebody who is technically self-employed.
I see.
But because they're classified as a limited partner, they don't have to do that. Okay. So limited partners do not pay self-employment tax on most payments as they are not active participants in the business. General partners usually have to pay self-employment taxes. What is a general partner? Well, every company needs at least one partner that is not limited. And this one general partner pays both sides of the self-employment tax. And then he dictates basically how all the other limited partners interact and how all of their relationships to the company operates. So, you can have one general partner and 20 limited partners, and they're all running this hedge fund, and only the one general partner is paying the self-employment taxes that really should be paid by each one of the limited partners too.
Okay.
So hedge fund managers use this classification and have been able to keep themselves from paying higher taxes. This ruling comes off the back of a New York-based hedge fund, Sobran Capital and Point72. These are two separate companies that are facing trouble with this ruling. And these are the Sobran Capital is a $20 billion hedge fund. Both of these partnered against New York to fight against it, the litigation, and they were on the losing side of the issue. So managers in this hedge fund, this is in Sobran Capital. So managers in this hedge fund were only paying taxes on $1 million worth of income, but they should have been paying taxes on closer to $70 million worth of income.
Wow.
That's how much money they're able to avoid paying their taxes on by having this limited partner loophole. Wow. If this ruling holds, the Point72 company will also see their reporting income have to go up exponentially. So in 2015, they've reported $0 in taxes. They would have had to report $125 million under this new ruling. In 2016, it was $0 that they reported, but they would have had reported $219 million.
Wow.
This is a massive amount of money that is not being properly taxed, and people are just getting away with murder here.
Yeah.
I mean, these hedge funds are getting away with murder. Originally, the limited partner loophole was supposed to benefit Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare.
Really?
I think it was put into place in the 70s, and it was originally designed so that these people weren't putting an obscene amount of money into their payroll taxes and then get a lot of money out of Social Security later on. But then when they put in the Social Security cap, that no longer was the case, that they would be able to get so much money out of Social Security, and it became more beneficial for them. So it's very complicated.
So many loopholes, always loopholes.
I know, but the point is here, the court system is going after hedge funds. And, I don't know many times in my life where I'm sitting down reading the Wall Street Journal and read stories about courts taking on hedge funds.
No.
You know what I mean? I just feel like a tide is shifting. And every time I read one of these stories, I get more and more excited that there is more scrutiny being put on the controllers of capital. There is more ire towards them. Hatred is a strong word, but there's a deeper distrust to the stock, manager than ever before.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good thing.
I do think it's a good thing. I think it's a result of the rise of populism right now, which we also talk about having horrible, frightening consequences. But one thing that populists on the right and left agree on and work together on in Congress often is taking down the big guy a peg. And I can't think of a better big guy to take down than hedge funds. Yeah.
So that's really cool. Next, I want to talk about Trump coming out and putting out his new campaign promise. This is just a wild thing.
Interesting decision,
right? It's like, why would you do this? What is going through your fucking head? So Trump is coming out and saying he wants to kill Obamacare. We have been down this road so many times. How long have we been hearing Republicans say repeal and replace about Obamacare? Trump comes into office in 2017 or 2018, around there. They put up the bill to eliminate Obamacare, and it fails. The Republicans in the House don't get it done. The Republicans in the Senate don't get it done. It's not. Trump already failed to repeal and replace Obamacare. The Republicans ran on that for a decade, and they failed to do it. Now he wants to dig up this old issue and bring it back. He said that the cost of Obamacare is out of control, plus it's not good health care. I'm seriously looking at alternatives. We had a couple of Republican senators who campaigned for 6 years against it and then raised their hands not to terminate it. It was a low point for the Republican Party, but we should never give up. But what kills me is he will never say the alternative. He will never say the alternative.
Yeah.
When he was running for office in 2020, there was a famous interview with Chris Wallace. And Chris Wallace straight up asks him, like, what's your plan for healthcare? He's like, I will give you a healthcare plan in 2 weeks. Okay, we are T minus,
6 years?
6 years
7
past
years.
that point.
Yeah.
So please, give us your healthcare plan, Donald Trump. Let us in on it. Because if we just go through with what you want to do, which is repeal Obamacare, here's the damages. 20 million people in the United States will lose coverage, raising the non-elderly uninsured rate by more than 7%. 135 million Americans with pre-existing conditions could face discrimination. Now, Trump will always say, I'm not against covering pre-existing conditions. Ron DeSantis will come out and say, I'm not against, protecting those with pre-existing conditions. Well, if you repeal all of Obamacare, that's what you get. If you don't have an alternative ready to go that you're not proposing, that you're not showing me, and all you're going out there saying you need to repeal Obamacare, this is what you're telling me you want to do right now until you give me your alternative.
Yeah.
Okay? States would lose $135 billion in federal funding for these marketplaces, Medicaid, and the Children's Health Insurance Program. So the entire Medicaid expansion is being put at risk if Obamacare gets repealed. Medicaid, guys, this is what gets health care to those who are impoverished. Children's Health Insurance Program, this is helping children whose parents don't have any health insurance that can't roll them in on it.
Yeah.
This is federal subsidies for marketplaces. We always say, Trump always says Obamacare is too expensive. Well, these federal subsidies are designed to get people access to private health insurance plans that they otherwise couldn't afford. Well, if you want to get rid of these subsidies, then what is your plan here?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seemed the implication is it's okay to just have some people be uninsured.
Right.
Yeah, but it's ridiculous because these are the kind of pathetic excuses we have for government health insurance for lack of a universal healthcare system.
Exactly. And
even those he wants to get rid of.
Right. Even those, so insurance companies would no longer be required to issue rebates when they overcharge Americans. That's a little obviously, listen, that and the pre-existing conditions ones, I'm sure any Republican bill will have it in there. But I don't know. The fact that he comes out and he doesn't specifically say that I want to protect those portions, how am I supposed to read that? Other than you want to just get rid of all of it. So obviously there are massive detriments to repealing Obamacare, and it's no longer popular to be against Obamacare. Obamacare's approval rating is basically the highest it has ever been, with 59% of people supporting the Affordable Care Act in 2023, with 40% of people not favoring the Affordable Care Act. This is because of results. This is because people felt the Medicaid expansion. This is because people felt the federal subsidies with their private health insurance market. This is because people who didn't have health care for so long finally do, and they know it's because of the Affordable Care Act. Without it, they would be without health insurance, period. End of story. Totally. So it's not popular to go and run and say, I want to make it harder for you to go to the doctor. Sorry, Trump. It's just not it. It's not just Trump who wants to totally revamp our health insurance programs. It's Republicans in the Senate, too. Tim Sheehy, who's running for Senate in Montana against John Tester, the main swing race in the U.S. Senate, he came out and he said, our hospitals have been built around federal healthcare subsidies. In my opinion, we need to return healthcare to pure privatization. What the hell does pure privatization mean? Does that mean a complete reduction of Medicare? Does that mean a decimation of Medicaid? What does pure privatization mean? Does that mean a reduction of all regulations? Does that cover for pre-existing conditions? If we're talking about pure privatization, then you can't say I want federal regulations, because that's not pure privatization anymore. So what does that mean when he says that? Well, reporters pushed him on it, and he refused to specifically say whether or not Medicare or Medicaid should be ended. But his spokesperson did say this: Tim knows we must keep our commitment to every Montana senior to protect their Social Security and Medicare benefits. He believes our nation made a promise to our seniors, and we must keep that promise, full stop. That tells me he wants to cut Medicare for you and me and all the people who have the technology to watch the show, but he doesn't want to cut Medicare and Social Security for the people who are currently getting it.
Okay.
That's what it tells me.
Okay.
Why did he say seniors? Why couldn't he just say that the people of America are trusted with these benefits? He says seniors specifically. That's a Nikki Haley comment.
I suppose. I think that could be fair. I also think it's possible that that statement is complete bullshit.
Right.
Yeah, right. Like, I think this sounds so like politicking to me.
Yes.
Like I don't trust that he will do either of these things or
Right.
vote for either of these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just, it blows my mind that, I mean, look, if you're under the age of 35, the Republican Party fucking doesn't give a shit about you. They don't want you to have Social Security when you retire. Or if they do, they want you to retire at 72. All right. Yeah. They want your Medicare benefits to be reduced. They want you to have to pay more for Medicare Advantage. They want you to not be able to be on your parents' health care insurance until you're 26. They are against the youth in every possible fundamental way here. There's just no reason to support their policies. They're not meant for you at all. So now he goes on. Tim Sheehy, apparently coming out of the 19th century, he says healthcare worked before health insurance even existed. Each town had a doctor that would drive to your house, take care of you, and then you'd pay him. And guess what? It worked. It worked when you actually paid a doctor for the services they provided. And then we started getting this health insurance stuff involved and these mega conglomerates. He's suggesting that could still work, which is like, what's going on right now? Yeah. Is this like a joke? Do you expect them to come in a fucking horse and buggy?
No, yeah.
Like,
he's talking about a time when our population was like less than a third of what it is now.
Well, less than a third, and we had more doctors per person.
Yes.
Our per capita doctor rate is down and only decreasing.
Yes.
Grown-ups who are in the U.S. government, who are in the Senate, who are in the Health and Human Services, Bernie is even working with other Republicans to get on this, expanding telemedicine, expanding access to seeing a doctor over the phone, right? Getting prescriptions over a webcam, seeing small checkup stuff like that. That is the future of medicine. The very, very quick interactions, the expansion of physician assistants, of nurse practitioners, not doctors driving to your fucking house.
Yeah. And also you didn't have x-rays or MRI machines, right? Or like robots doing surgery on you. Things got more expensive because things got a lot better.
Yes.
But also, I mean, to be clear, we did a deep dive on healthcare. And one of the things we talked about is that the mega conglomerate structure of hospitals is enormously responsible for the high costs that we endure here in the U.S. for healthcare.
Absolutely.
But he doesn't seem to be implying here that he's going to dismantle that. He's implying that it's bad, but to say that you'll just have doctors driving to people's houses, that doesn't make much sense to me.
And when he says that he's explicitly against health insurance, right? Healthcare worked before health insurance existed. What? Like, it worked really badly because only the people who could directly afford to pay a doctor out of pocket saw a doctor.
Exactly.
So when you say it worked for who?
Yes.
It didn't work for the working class.
That's the thing. It's just regressing our expectations for the quality of care that we can provide to people.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the type of people who are running for the U.S. Senate, guys. People who want to get rid of Obamacare, privatize our entire health insurance system. Literally says it. He wants to return it to pure privatization. Can't get more explicit than that. So donate to John Tester. Please, God. Because, John Tester may be a conservative Democrat, but he's way the hell better than whatever this is, man. This is just ridiculous. Obviously, the guy's a CEO of like an aerospace company, by the way. Tim Sheehy.
Okay.
Also a veteran, so thank him for his service. But
fuck you.
Yeah, but fuck you, man. God, you suck.
No.
I want to switch over to what's going on in Europe because we have two really crazy European economic stories.
Yeah, we do.
That are just insane.
It is hitting the fan over there.
Stuff is going down.
Yeah.
So let's start with the UK, and then we're going to talk about Germany. So the United Kingdom is having some serious financial troubles, and it's only getting worse. City councils are declaring bankruptcy for the first time in a long time. Birmingham City Council has declared bankruptcy because of £760 million in unpaid equal pay claims. Okay, so Hackney, Thurrock, Woking, and North. This is a fake country. This is just a fake country. These aren't real.
Hackney, Thurrock, Woking, and Northamptonshire.
God, these countries suck. This is fake. This is
It's attacking you right at your biggest weakness.
This is
pronunciation.
It's so fucked up.
Yeah.
So they're declaring bankruptcy through Section 114, which means that councils must refrain from making any new spending commitments and must meet within 21 days to discuss what to do next. This is a very, very serious development here. At certain points here, the government might come in and have to take over the entire town's finances. The town might have to do capitalization things where they have to sell off their public assets in order to make a lot of these payments. And all of this is happening because of the tax base that these city councils get is not keeping up with the inflationary spiral that the United Kingdom is going through. The Institute for Government estimates that the fall in spending power was 31% between 2009 and 2022. A 31% decline in spending power.
Wow.
So how can we expect these local town governments to do the same things they were doing in 2009 and 2010 with fucking a third less of the buying power?
You can't.
You can't, and that's what's happening now. They can't do it. We see spending on childcare and elderly care is going to be rising exponentially over the next decade. And if these local communities can't keep up with that requirement and those, demands now, there's no way they're going to be able to keep up with this in the decade to come.
No.
There's no shot. So again, towns are going to be either forced to cut back on services or sell off their public assets, which is nothing that the town, both of those options are completely unacceptable to voters, right? Voters aren't going to be okay with either of those things. So there needs to be another way here. And the national government is looking at other ways that these local councils can get their finances in order. Now, right now, raising money in these town councils is very, very difficult. They are only allowed to increase taxes 5% over each year. We have something similar here in Massachusetts. We are only allowed to increase taxes 2.5% every year. We're only allowed to do that. It's called Proposition 2.5. Now, we can go to the ballot and ask voters to approve a tax increase of more than 2.5%. And my town, Brookline, has done very well at always passing those increases. Last year, we passed an 8.5% tax increase to fund government's growing needs here. But they don't really have the authority in Britain to go beyond this 5%. Now, even if each community did this maximum tax allowed each year by 5%, this could have done some good. But it's important to remember that areas that have more valuable properties are going to be the ones who make more money from these local property taxes. So even the towns who have the worst financial situations, who have the worst pocketbooks, don't even have that big of a property rate or property value to tax from. So the national government is thinking of giving councils a larger authority in raising taxes, specifically in the council. They were thinking about council-specific VAT taxes, council-specific income taxes, and council-specific corporate taxes. Now, we can sit here and kind of disagree with the council-specific corporate taxes because that just causes race to the bottoms all over the place, probably, right? But this is, we need to give the United Kingdom is mulling over giving these town councils more authority to raise more money by different avenues.
Yeah.
And the UK is doing the worst out of all the other European nations in regards to inflation right now.
Yeah.
The headline inflation in the UK is 4.6%, but the core inflation rate is still 5.6%. When we look at the United States, our headline is 3.2 and the core is 4%. Keep in mind, always remember, core inflation excludes food and energy So what we're seeing in Britain is a reduction in inflation that is mainly being driven down by reductions in cost, in prices of the most volatile commodities, food and energy.
Yeah.
Also, the United Kingdom has seen terrible GDP growth over the last few years here. Specifically, we're comparing quarter 2023 with quarter 4 of 2019. How much GDP change, real GDP in the G7 has happened since pre-pandemic, since before the pandemic? The United States, up at the top, killing it at 7.4% growth since quarter 4 of 2019. Second place is Canada, not even close at 3.5.
Yeah.
God, it's great to be in America. Go down the list. Italy, the Eurozone generally is 3. Japan, 2.4. France and UK both at 1.8 real GDP growth since 2019. Yeah. Abysmal. Abysmal.
The biggest problem here is they need money.
They need money.
They need money, and they don't have enough of it, and their economy isn't growing to get them more of it. So they would have to institute taxes, but they would have to do it so specifically to target the upper classes, right? To be able to have it even really be that effective, I think, in reinvigorating the economy. Because if you're taking from the middle and lower classes, then it's not going to help anything.
No, because then you're wrecking those people buying power, which stops demand all over the economy, because those are the people who consume the most.
Exactly. So they're just in this really sticky situation right now that it's not easy to maneuver out of at all.
And listen, obviously the UK leaving the European Union did no benefits here. No. Leaving, the single market and leaving one of the largest free trading blocks, if not the largest free trading block in the world, probably did a lot, definitely did a lot to damage their growth figures here. So they're just in a really, really bad position. But there's one G7 country that I didn't mention yet that's in an even worse position.
Yeah. And
that's Germany.
Germany, that's crazy, because the UK's growth from before the pandemic has only been 1.8%. Germany's has been 0.3%.
The only G7 country to technically be in a recession. They had negative growth the last 2 quarters.
Yes, they are. Germany is suffering mightily, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them being demographic decline, which is happening kind of across the world in the advanced world. But they were just handed a decision from the highest court in their country that is absolutely handicapping their government.
So brutal.
It's hammering them. So the court ruled that the government couldn't use 60 billion euros, that's around $65 billion, of pandemic era money that it was expecting to have for the 2024 budget. So November 16th, the court found that the plan was unconstitutional because they say it violated the debt brake. Now, I think we've talked about this in Germany before. They have a mechanism called the debt brake, which restricts Germany's budget deficit to 0.35% of GDP. Okay, that's only about 15 billion euros.
That is not enough.
No, that's very, very small, especially with some of the challenges that Germany is currently facing, right? So one of the challenges that they're trying to address is climate change and its emerging energy needs and its desire to point that money and their efforts in the direction of renewable energy, given they've been cut off from Russian gas, which they had been addicted to for years before Russia invaded Ukraine. So they wanted to use this 60 billion euros in pandemic money and put it into its climate and transformation fund. Now it looks like it's not going to be able to do that. Okay. And also, so the debt brake had been suspended, and it can be suspended for emergencies. It was suspended for COVID in 2020 and 2021, and then again in 2022 because of continued fallout from COVID, but also because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. The problem is they were citing still the 2020 and 2021 COVID emergency as the reason to be able to use the $60 billion in 2024. And the court was like, no, you can't use it for a different year that you actually declared the emergency in. So even after shifting around the budget a little bit, this ruling is looking to leave a 20 billion euro gap in funding needed for the Climate and Transformation Fund, which is just brutal, right? This is exactly when we need that money. This is exactly when Germany needs to be transitioning with as much fervor as it can to a green energy economy.
And what I'm understanding here is a lot of the 60 billion was supposed to go to revamping its public transportation. A lot of it was supposed to be going towards its train systems, its bridges. A lot of it was supposed to be going towards its hard infrastructure. I'm shocked that hard infrastructure isn't an exception for the debt brake.
Really?
I'm shocked. I would think, like, what's a more safe investment? Like, if you want to, listen, it was passed by, the debt brake is new in German politics. It was passed in like 2010.
Yeah, relatively new. 2009, I think.
2009, something like that. It was under Angela Merkel after the 2008 recession.
Yes.
And they were like, we need to tighten up our pants or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was like their line. And it was very, very popular because it made people feel like the government was being responsible.
Exactly.
Well, sometimes it's actually very, very irresponsible to not take out debt when debt is cheap.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we saw in the 2010s decade, where we had cheap capital that couldn't be utilized because of the German debt brake.
Totally.
Right?
Absolutely.
They could have taken out more money then, but I understand, like, if you're going to have this debt brake, right? It makes sense to me that you don't want to over leverage your nation on risky investments. Like, if you want to, it's not probably a good idea to fund social services through deficit spending. Fine, I get that. Funding infrastructure through deficit spending seems like fine to me because it's a positive, it has direct economic benefits.
Yes.
It increases mobility. It increases how fast you're able to move goods. You know what I mean?
It's just much safer.
Just a much safer investment. So I would think that they would have included a provision to exempt that, but they didn't. So now they're screwed.
Now they pretty much are screwed unless they reform the debt brake, because now the German parliament, at least some of German parliament, is thinking the exact same way you are. It's like, okay, taking on debt can be risky. Not taking on debt can also be risky, especially right now. So the court ruling came out on November 15th. That was a while ago now. We're recording this on December 5th. So since then, the German Prime Minister Olaf Scholz has asked Parliament, one, to suspend the debt brake again, to declare that the current challenges that they're facing constitutes another state of emergency. The finance minister has said he will pronounce 2023, so like the end of this year, a year of emergency, which frees him up to suspend it so that they can borrow for the rest of this year. But he is still really reluctant to declare a year of emergency for 2024 because Lindner is in the CDU, the Christian Democrat.
No, Lindner is in the FDP, the Free Democrat Party.
Yes, the FDP.
Yes.
Thank you. Which is very much neoliberal, very much free market. It doesn't like heavy government spending. So he doesn't want to do that for 24, but he might still have to. The Greens and the SPD, which is more the center-left party, they're calling to reform the debt brake. Economists they hate the debt brake, especially at this point. They're like, this is just a complete straitjacket for this country. It's been in a recession. It's been the slowest growing country in the G7 since the pandemic. And this is the reason. It's because they can't borrow when they need to. When everyone else is around them is borrowing and infusing money into their own economies, Germany can't do it.
And I think this is a fantastic example of two different ideologies, austerity or Keynesianism, right? You had two different responses to recession. You had the U.S. response, which was fucking Keynesianism, right?
Yep.
It was send people with kids money, get everyone a check in the mail, get everyone access to better healthcare. Bam, 7.4% growth since pre-pandemic levels. Germany, don't take out any debt at all for any investments.
Yep.
Don't produce your infrastructure. Don't have a real heavy-handed industrial plan. 3.3% growth.
Yeah.
Two totally different philosophies of what government is supposed to be doing. And shockingly, the U.S. is on the left compared to Germany, which I wouldn't be thinking I'd be saying.
Yeah.
But it's what it is.
It is wild. And yeah, the history is really interesting with when they instituted the debt brake, because they were looking around at like Greece and Italy, where the rampant spending did kind of destroy their economies. And they wanted to be the standard bearer at the front of the EU of fiscal responsibility.
Yeah,
they wanted
did.
to be able to go into those countries and say, you're doing this wrong, and we have the standing to say that to you because look at how we're doing it right.
Right.
But things change, and the absolutism in any of these financial or these economic ideologies is the wrong way to go, and this is proof of that.
Yeah.
So you're right, I think, about public transportation. Other plans that this hole in their budget will probably affect are a plan to build out a network of over 1,700 EV chargers across the country, as is a plan to build up Germany's backup power generators, which are completely necessary to be able to build up its renewables, because those power generators need to be online to cover the moments when the renewables are intermittently offline, right? Sun doesn't always shine, wind doesn't always blow.
Dude, this is bad.
Yes, this is extremely bad.
Germany just does not have the capital to do this anymore. They do not. They need to start taking out debt, and they need to start growing again. They're screwed.
Exactly.
And I know there's nothing you can do about the demographics. Okay, there really isn't. I mean, they can accept more immigration, but I don't think the country is prepared for that. No, I don't think they have the political appetite. But
they would be a perfect place for it, though.
I know.
Ugh. I mean, Ukraine. Yeah. Anyways.
But now Germany, 0.3% GDP growth. They are struggling massively, and because of this difficult economic position, it is leading them to subvert Russian sanctions, which is so sad to see.
Yeah.
Basically, right after the Russians invaded Ukraine, the entire West as a bloc was like, no more business with Russia. Don't do it anymore. Well, when that happened, we saw spikes in German exports to 4 countries: Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Georgia, and Kazakhstan. Kyrgyzstan saw a 70% increase in exports.
Yeah.
Armenia saw like a 20-30% increase. No, wait, hold on. I'm not going to get all these things wrong. Point is, they all went up a lot. Okay. Kyrgyzstan, a lot. Now, what do all 4 of these countries have in common? They have free trade agreements with Russia.
Yeah.
So by Kazakhstan, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia getting all these German goods, they're not staying in these countries. They're not staying in Kazakhstan.
No.
Of course not. They're getting shipped up to Russia. Russia is still getting German goods through this backdoor method, and some of it is motor vehicle and motor vehicle parts.
Yeah.
And that's helping the war effort. Germany is explicitly helping Russia with the war effort by allowing their corporations to sell to these companies. And it's not cool. It's not good.
No.
It ruins their credibility. It makes me it makes me question their reliability.
Definitely.
Because it's like, how are you letting this happen?
Yeah.
It's obviously they know about it.
Yeah. Well, how can you rely? I mean, just think about this in terms of people. You can't rely on someone who's in desolation, who's extremely desperate.
True.
Right? You can't trust them to do the selfless thing in that case.
It's crazy that I'm sitting here talking about Germany being in this desolate situation, right?
Yeah.
It's Germany. In 2010s, I was talking to my dad about this, and he was like, what do you mean Germany's having trouble? Germany's Germany. Germany's like the economic powerhouse of Europe. And I had to, be like, no, actually, Germany's like the worst performing country over the last couple of years. And he's shocked. It's like this psyche that people have baked in about the German economy that it's always perfect. Well, now it isn't.
No.
They need massive, massive reforms to really change it. And it doesn't look like people are really looking forward to it, because we see the AfD rising in the polls. We see the CDU still get some power. The FDP has gone down a lot, but that's because the FDP voters are mainly moving to the CDU. The SPD is going down. The Greens are going down.
Yep.
The Left Party is going down. Only ones that are going up is the hard right. And they don't have an answer to these questions except for anti-Muslim rhetoric.
Totally.
They don't have any other answers.
Well, I think it's extremely counterproductive, because as the demographics set in as the problem that they are to hurt the economy, as more working age people age out of that group, the worse the economy gets, the more people think that something needs to shake up the system, and the more they point to populist anti-immigration rhetoric as the way to do so, when in actuality, immigration is
the only thing keeping them afloat.
Like
in some
one
ways.
of the only things that could save them, that
Yep.
could help them.
No, it's crazy. It's sad. It sucks.
Yeah. But it just keeps happening.
But it just keeps happening. One more thing I wanted to say here. Bavaria recently passed a very, very important piece of legislation. Bavaria is on the front lines of fighting the largest problems in Germany right now. They just passed a bill that would limit any government forms from having gender-neutral language. So we're glad they're there.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah, like that's what they're focused on. You know, they're focused on removing gender-neutral language from goddamn federal paperwork.
I heard a story recently of someone who visited Bavaria and told some like a German, I don't know if it was their hairdresser or something, that they had gone there, and the German person sneered and was like, "Oh, Bavaria," and my friend was like, "What's wrong with Bavaria?" And she was like, "It's like the Texas of Germany."
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That is so funny. It's so funny because they've been the Texas of Germany for so long.
Yeah.
Like if you go back and you read about like 30 Years' War, the war between the Protestants and the Catholics in the early 1600s, they were so like this reactionary powerhouse.
Yeah.
You know, and they've always been this reactionary powerhouse. Anyway, let's talk about Biden administration and what they're doing to combat some of the ways China is looking to profit off of the green energy transition.
Yeah, this is a set of rules that the administration came out with following, I think it's, sometimes I mix up his pieces of legislation, but I think it's Inflation Reduction Act that had the EV credits. Part of that piece of legislation included kind of anti-China language because, and honestly, a big part of it was getting Joe Manchin's vote. He was worried about too many of these jobs that are higher up the value chain or higher up the supply chain from going to China, and he wanted more the credits to be given to EV manufacturers and customers of those made with materials and parts from the U.S. So this guidance specifically said vehicles with batteries or critical minerals from companies from China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran would not be eligible for $6 billion allocated to a battery manufacturing and grant program, nor the $7,500 consumer EV tax credit. Now, there are some exceptions to the critical minerals in these rules, but the Biden administration said that the minerals that are accepted make up only 2% of the batteries. However, that was not okay with Manchin. He blasted the exemption, and he quoted the law as saying the vehicles are ineligible for credits if any of the critical minerals are from one of the countries on the banned list. So who knows? Maybe this gets taken to court. Maybe these rules are tweaked a little bit because of the initial legislation that was passed.
No, I mean, listen, we talked about the supply chain of these EVs. So as we know, a lot of these resources are only found in China, manganese being the most prominent. We've talked about that before in our deep dive on electric vehicles. If you haven't seen it, go check it out.
Yeah.
Listen, I understand where Manchin is coming from, but I don't know if he understands that they are so limited to China specifically.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Biden knew that this wouldn't go over smoothly with him.
Of course.
And he was hoping that he could just kind of slip it under, and now he's hoping that it doesn't get taken to court. Mm-hmm. Because it will just completely kneecap them, right, to not be able to import any of these from China. Though for some, it'll be smart to start building up supply chains of these materials with our free trade partners.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that is going to incentivize us to do so. One other loophole. This one I'm more concerned about that China could get around the rules with is if it makes joint ventures or invests in companies that are located in American free trade partners like South Korea. There have already been some reports that it's looking to do so. So if that happens, I mean, China's always looking for loopholes around our restrictions, right?
course.
So I wouldn't be surprised at all. Hopefully, the goal is still to restrict it overall, though, right?
Right.
And no matter what, you're going to lessen the supply. You're going to kind of restrict what's coming out of China, which is going to do the job of invigorating a supply chain in North America and with our other free trade partners, I think.
Exactly.
I also think the rules are they're broad enough to cover a lot of what China might try to do, right? It says that these companies the companies that make the materials or parts that can't be in the EVs or that make the EVs, they can't be incorporated or domiciled in the countries of note. They can't, I don't think they can even, it says they can't engage in the extraction, processing, or recycling of such critical minerals, the manufacturing or assembly of such components, or the processing of such materials in a covered nation. So that's like sweeping.
Right.
Besides, of course, the few materials that are exempted. But it's hard to get around that, especially because the materials that are coming out of China need to be mined
in China. Right? So that extraction word,
yeah,
like that's doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Exactly. And then the other point that they have is that the company can't be over 25% owned by any of those covered nations.
So that helps what you were talking about. If China goes into a joint venture in South Korea, they can't even own more than 25% of the company anyway.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's not even benefiting China to that large of an extent, even if they did partner with it, right?
Exactly. So it's restricted heavily, even if not completely. So I think the rules are going to be pretty effective.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Interesting. The last current event we have here is something that is still very much developing. We have some drums of war going on in the Western Hemisphere, which is just, it's a really weird time we're living in, guys. We are seeing the decimation of American hegemony right now, and I think we're going to see a lot of these smaller border wars between countries we've never thought about before. I think these are going to become way more prominent as America kind of recedes from the world stage militarily. I think these are going to be popping up a lot.
Okay.
So Venezuela is looking to take over 2/3 of the neighboring country of Guyana. It's so interesting because they're not just going to invade it. They took it to a vote. They went to the people of Venezuela and they said, "Hey, do you want our government to pursue a policy of annexing the Essequibo region of Guyana?" And 95% of people apparently voted yes. They want the government to move towards the direction of annexing the Essequibo region of Guyana.
That's so insane.
I know.
So insane.
So this Essequibo region covers 2/3 of Guyana. It is densely covered in forest. It's actually fairly sparsely populated, but there are a lot of indigenous groups in Guyana. Guyana is actually interesting because it is one of the only South American nations that has almost zero white people. It is almost exclusively descendants of like mixed ethnicities between Spanish and natives and natives themselves. They are the most, native population.
Interesting.
Yeah, you're looking at it right now. You see this line?
Yeah.
Everything to the west is the Essequibo.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now, why is Venezuela doing this? Well, Venezuela has actually been looking to do this for a very, 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 very long time. Venezuela's desire to annex this portion of the country dates back all the way to colonialism. What a shock, right? Guyana was originally a Dutch colony. It later became a British colony. Now, Britain ruled this colony for about 200 years before it finally gained its independence in 1966, where Guyana became its own independent republic in 1970. Well, right after gaining their independence, Venezuela comes out the door. They're like, hey, they used the fact that when Venezuela was a Spanish colony, they had the Essequibo region in their borders. So they're saying that the British never had the right to take the Essequibo region and put it into their colony of Guyana, let alone give it to a new country, Guyana, to now be its own independent republic. It belongs to Venezuela. Well, this picked up a lot of fervor in 2015 when massive amounts of oil were found off the coast of the Essequibo region of Guyana. ExxonMobil discovered 11 billion barrels of oil there, which is a very, very insane amount of oil. Oil already generates $1 billion in revenues annually for the Guyana government, but by 2040, it is expected to produce $7.5 billion. And so Guyana is currently one of the most impoverished countries in the world. It is covered by rainforest, only has about 800,000 people, but it will become the fourth largest offshore oil producer in the world.
Wow.
By forecasts. Another interesting fact about the population of Guyana, they actually have the largest Latin American ethnic group in the United States by population.
Really?
40% of people who identify as Guyanese are in America.
Wow.
Are in the United States.
Okay.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of there's actually like a fairly substantial voting block in the United States of these people, who are very, very loyal and respected by or respect America. So they voted Venezuela voted 95% to take over, to annex the territory. This doesn't necessarily mean they voted to invade, right? That's what Maduro is saying. This doesn't. It's not a vote for invasion, but the Guyana government is not just going to let them take 2/3 of their country.
No.
So I don't imagine this is going to be a peaceful process. Brazil is actually moving military resources near the border of Guyana
In preparation.
to defend Guyana against Venezuela.
Okay.
Now, which is interesting because this is what's all messed up in my head here. Venezuela is supposed to be a socialist country. Mm-hmm. Brazil is currently ruled by the Socialist Party, and then Guyana is currently ruled by a Socialist Party. What are we all fighting about? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Why are we all fighting? What's happening?
It's still who gets the oil.
It's still all about who gets the oil. American leftists get so mad when the United States invade Iraq for oil. And it's contentious whether or not the United States actually did invade for oil, okay? But now Venezuela is literally invading for oil. Why do I not see any anger about this? What's going on here? Like, why? I feel like everyone's like kind of okay with this.
Really?
That's how I feel. I haven't seen any pushback against Venezuela at all.
Well, I'm less plugged into Twitter than you, so I wouldn't know.
No, I haven't seen any pushback at all. I haven't really heard anybody talk about it except like, oh, it's happening. I haven't heard anybody make a value judgment.
Yeah.
Right? I'm making a value judgment. This is wrong. This is bad. We have international rules and international order for a reason. The United Nations has already determined in the 70s and 80s that this place belongs to Guyana. Mm-hmm. It's already settled, okay? Venezuela cannot just come in here and forcibly dictate this to this country and take its natural resources from them.
No. This is the exact same reason that it was a problem that Russia invaded Ukraine.
Exactly. So, like I said, Guyana is ruled by a democratic socialist government, which actually has Marxist-Leninist factions inside of this government. So it's not like it's a right-wing, neoliberal United States puppet. I think the party, the People's Progressive Party, used to be, like, I think almost classified as a terrorist organization by the United States or something like that. Like, it was very, like, the United States was hostile to this organization, and it was hostile to the United States.
Oh.
But now, they're like, I don't want to say they're becoming partners, but they're not killing each other. They're not angry at each other.
The U.S. and Guyana?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Are they aligning?
Aligning isn't the right word, but but there's aligning isn't the right word.
They're becoming slightly friendlier.
But they are, because now Exxon has business interests in Guyana.
Okay.
So now there's economic ties between the two countries.
I see.
Right? So now there is some type of American interest here. So
okay. Now,
Guyana does get some benefit off of these private companies coming in and drilling their oil. Guyana receives 12.5% of all revenue generated from the oil that is produced, and also gets a 2% royalty. Now, this will make the country rich in the long term, but as of right now, the people of Guyana are getting kind of screwed, because the ExxonMobil do not, as part of the deal, do not have to pay taxes on their profits in Guyana, which means that they're just raking in the big bucks.
Yeah, and part of their deal is that the government has to front the money for their exploration and construction of infrastructure. So this is very much something that's going to help down the line, but so far has cost the government a lot more than they've been able to reap.
Exactly. And the people of Guyana are angry about this. Okay, they want to renegotiate the treaty. They think it was negotiated in bad faith. Mm-hmm. They think they were screwed over, and they were right. They were right. They were screwed over, and I do want them to renegotiate this. But just because they want to renegotiate these oil permitting rights does not mean that Venezuela should go in and invade it and then renegotiate it all for them. That's not how this should work.
No, I mean, do you think they're right? I mean, they're getting screwed right now, but
yeah,
this is how investment works a lot of the time.
Yes, I mean, look, this is a long-term game. We'll see what happens in 5 years, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We know that this is going to be the fourth largest oil producer in the world. That's insane.
It's assumed. It's projected.
It's assumed that they're not invaded by Venezuela.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's the funny thing about saying we'll see where this goes in 5 years.
Maybe it won't go anywhere in 5 years. Because all these companies are like, wait a second, we're going to get invaded and then nationalized? Get me the hell out of here.
Yeah.
But listen, there are God, it's so difficult because I so much deeply believe that oil companies should be extremely responsible to the government of the nation in which they're operating. Like in regards to how much of the profit or revenue they're able to keep from the oil production, how and where they're able to drill and when they're able to drill, what they're used to drill, the amount of profits they're able to make off selling their oil. I think all that has to be regulated because of how bad oil is for the world, right? Okay. But how much does that do to making the oil companies leave the nation and then not come back and find a dirtier place to do oil production? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, think about in the United States, we're going to cap the amount of methane that can be leaked out, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because this is kind of a completely different part of the equation. Like when a company considers going somewhere to drill for new oil, this is one of the assumptions that they just rest on, right? They don't consider, what if this country gets invaded,
right,
by a socialist country that's going to nationalize us?
Yeah.
So I feel like there are different things, like the consideration as to whether a foreign country will come in and nationalize. What if it was so if Guyana was nationalizing the Exxon portion, you would be down with it?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I'd be. I mean, yeah. No. I wouldn't think so. I would be down with it.
Okay.
If I would be down with it. Period.
Sure.
If Guyana voted and was like, I want to, and it was like UN regulated election, like everything was clean. Like, I actually want to join Venezuela and nationalize all these oil fields.
Okay.
I'd be like, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay.
I wouldn't have a problem with that because I don't have a fundamental disagreement with, nationalizing your natural resources for the specific benefit of the people whose natural resources it is. I have no issue with that.
Okay.
But I also like the way Guyana's doing it, where they're splitting the profits 50-50. I think that's a good step. Like if I had, honestly, I think that might actually be better for the country long term because if they nationalized it, the companies probably wouldn't go there.
Yes.
Right? But if they split the profits 50-50 or whatever, right now they're doing 12.5%, that's totally unacceptable. That got to be renegotiated. But if you're going to get a portion of the profits and it's a reasonable portion, the people are happy with it, I'm not really against it at that point.
Okay.
I think I just need to see that these companies give to the government in a way that reflects the people's desire to profit off of their own resources. So,
okay.
Yeah, I think that's where the real concern is.
That makes sense to me.
Sure. If they want to go through with nationalizing it, I'm not going to come out and heavy against it.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, because it's their land. So
exactly. The problem isn't whether oil is private or public. The problem is whether a country invades another country.
That's the issue here. Yeah. That's the issue. Can a country invade another country? The answer is no. Mm-hmm. End of story.
Yeah, agreed.
And this also comes off the back of the Biden administration weakening sanctions against Venezuela. And so, listen, as an American socialist, I want Venezuela to have less sanctions on them. I want them to be roped into the American economy. I want them to be able to sell their oil to us. I want all that. I want all that stuff. But when you come out here and you start sounding like you're threatening to invade another country, I don't want to do business with you. I want to choke your economy.
Interesting.
If 95% of your country wants to invade another country, why would I weaken sanctions against you? Why would I allow you to economically prosper if you're going to be doing this type of stuff?
Yeah, well, I also only want sanctions to be weakened against Venezuela if they shift more democratic,
right,
rather than socialist dictatorship.
Well, socialist, yeah, obviously, but that's what's that they're supposed to have free and fair elections,
correct,
in the coming months here.
Yeah,
and we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, but I just want to note, that's a big part of why the sanctions were on in the first place. It's not just like we saw them and it was like, oh, they're socialist, so we need to clamp down on them. There's a democratic element to it.
No, yeah, there is a democratic ideological element too, on top of the nationalization of the oil company.
Yes.
All right. Let's move on to the deep dive.
Yes. Let's deep dive.
This is going to be interesting.
This is going to be interesting. Today we're going to talk about charter schools, which I'll start with defining as, or at least what charter schools are supposed to be, are public schools that kind of lie outside of public rules. So they don't necessarily have to be they lie outside the public districts. So even though some of the money is taken from the public district to fund the charter school, they aren't represented by the same unions. Kids who otherwise would be going to a specific one of the schools in their public districts will instead apply to a public school and get entered into a lottery if there are more applicants than there are seats available at the school, to see who goes. And these schools have a lot more leeway in how they operate. The teachers are they're known for being more experimental. They oftentimes can have longer school days or school years. And they're extremely controversial. There's rampant argument on both sides, and there are some people who are so strongly in favor of charter schools, and there are people who are staunchly against them. So I would start here with a credo study. So credo is an acronym that I'm forgetting what it stands for.
I have it somewhere on my page too.
Okay. It's
the Center for Research on Education Outcomes.
Okay. Sounds good. It's a Stanford-based organization, and they release a study every few years. Now they've released 3 versions of this. The last one came out in 2019, I believe, or maybe 2020. It was just post-pandemic, about how charter schools perform, really. And in the most recent one, they found that overall, charter schools are effective in producing learning gains for their students. Charter students gained an additional 6 days of learning, which is how they measure it in math, and 16 days in reading is what they found. So that sounds great, obviously, but then you want to know a little bit more about how that works, right? And so, do charter schools address inequity? The answer here also seems to be a resounding yes. Charter schools have the greatest effects for Black and Hispanic students who traditionally lag behind their white and Asian peers in math and reading learning outcomes. And I found these really cool charts that show kind of a curve of the scores between white and Black students, specifically who enroll, kind of the curve of how they look before entering a charter school in 6th grade and then after leaving it in 8th grade. And you see this significant difference where the curve for Black students is shifted to the left, and it kind of tails off with more of the area of the curve towards the worst scores, whereas for the white students, it's much more shifted to the right with a much lower tail on the bottom. And then after students leave the charter middle schools, the curves are almost identical, almost completely aligned. The great thing about charter schools is that they overrepresent low income, impoverished, and generally underserved communities. They have more Black students and more Hispanic students as a percentage of their population than the percentage of those ages of children in the U.S. And they produce the greatest gains for those students, which I feel like is a huge deal, super important. One really interesting split that I found, though, and I think this is kind of the foundation of my ideas on urban schools, on charter schools, is that urban schools are much more effective than suburban and rural schools. Mm-hmm. Urban schools, the study found, produce an additional 28 days of math learning and 29 days of reading learning. Whereas suburban schools, 3 days of math, 14 days of reading. That 14 days of reading is still quite good. But rural charter schools produced 10 days fewer of learning than the local public schools. And there doesn't seem to be a ton of research answering this question yet, but the research does keep coming in support of it. I'm not sure why this. I don't know if you have any ideas of why the data comes out that way.
No, I don't know. I think No, I think urban schools are the most underserved, but surrounded by so much opportunity to do better. Whereas in a rural community, I don't think you necessarily have the good teachers right around the corner that would be able to just go and hop into a charter school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in an urban area, you can work on that. Now, listen, I have more issues with charter schools than Ben, but I do have to say I am impressed with how they are able to improve test scores. One of my big concerns was, are people going to charter schools already pre-selected or more likely to be children with more active parents in their lives to apply them to the charter school to get them in that university, to get them in that school, to get them into the lottery system and get them in school, into the better school systems. Now, what we've seen with this study specifically, they were controlling for this effect. They were tracking students before entering charter school and then after entering charter school. So it was the same group of students on both ends there. I saw another study which talks about something going on in Katrina in Louisiana after the hurricane, where the whole place was just decimated. And what was built back was all charter schools. So every student in this area in Katrina in Louisiana was going to a charter school.
Yeah.
And all of these students ended up performing better than the students who were there prior. And they went from like bottom of the nation to like near to the top, or at least better than average.
Okay.
So I think that concern for me is a little bit of a wash. I think I'm okay with that. Now,
one other way I'll say that this is controlled for is they have done studies where they only look at students who are entered into the lottery. So they're able to look at students who were able to attend the charter school and perform there versus students whose parents entered them into the lottery to get into the charter school, but they weren't able to go. And in those cases, they still find significantly improved performances for the children that are accepted into the charter schools.
Oh, I see. So they were comparing even the ones who didn't get in.
Exactly.
I see.
So that controls for the family issue.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So now, why are charter schools so successful?
That's the interesting question.
Now, these are a couple things that I read about hypothesis reasons of why they're so successful. So longer school days. Charter schools are more likely to have longer school days and longer school years.
Yep.
Now this, right away, this makes me feel like the measurement of success in some of the studies done by Credo are a little flawed.
Because they're measuring success by additional days and years. So if you have additional time,
obviously you're going to have more than that. Intensive personal tutoring for students who need it. That's awesome. Less money spent on administration, gyms, cafeterias. More money is spent in the classroom, but I have some concerns with that. Culture of respect for learning and high expectations. That's just general culture stuff. And teachers are paid based off of effectiveness and can be fired. Now, I want to first go into less money being spent on administration, and then we'll get into the juicy one, which is teachers being paid off of effectiveness. But money being spent on administration, gyms, and all that actually differs between charter schools. Not all charter schools have the same administration costs. One of the big differential factors is if the charter school is for profit or if the charter school is a nonprofit. Now, technically, a charter school cannot be for profit because it uses public money, but it is classified as for profit if it uses a lot of for-profit services to run their school.
Oh, okay. That's not where I thought you were going with this.
What did you think?
So have you read about charter management organizations?
Yes. And then they contract out to charter management organizations.
Some of which are for profit, some of which are not.
Yes.
Yes. So that's I have a lot of problem with charter schools too in some instances. And I've seen a lot of evidence supporting the idea that for-profit charter management organizations ruin charter schools.
Yes.
And make it so that they perform very badly for their students.
Yes.
And I think that this is a good idea in a lot of ways, but I honestly think that poor for-profit charter management organizations should just be banned.
Right. Totally agree.
Yeah.
For-profit charter management organizations absolutely should be banned. Here is one reason why. For-profit charter schools spend more of their operating funds on purchase services than other charter schools. A nonprofit community-based charter school will spend about 27% of all of its resources on contracted services. A for-profit management organization, this is the phrase you just referenced, spends 77% of all of its resources on these contracted services. We also see a reduction in student performance based off of these for-profit schools.
Yep.
It's actually worse. This is interesting to me. A for-profit charter school actually performs worse when it hires its own staff rather than its contract staff. So I don't know. Maybe that's noise because the sample for own staff is pretty small. The sample for own staff in this study here, they're looking at charter schools in Ohio, is only 28, when the for-profit for contract staff is 76. So maybe there's a difference with the sample there that makes the noise too much to really compare fairly.
Okay.
But overall, it's important to bake it in here. For-profit charter schools perform worse than nonprofit schools on English and math, more on math than English. They are actually even worse when it comes to disciplinary reports. They are more likely to have students that are not, keeping up with the. How do I even say this? What do I say here? They're breaking the rules. They're breaking the rules. Right?
Exactly.
They're a bunch of bastards.
Something that I've also found about the profit-based or the profit-incentivized management organizations is it seems they are more strict with their students, that they discipline the students more. And there have been reports of some organizations that basically try to bully the students out of the schools or try to bully the parents into withdrawing their kids from the schools.
Oh, like if they don't fit the mold, get them out of here. I get it.
Okay. Or because the initial foundational idea with charter schools is supposed to be like competition, right? The best charter schools will be selected by parents more and more students will go. And so the best methods of teaching will be weeded out. But with profit-based schools, then they are that incentivized to have good results that they're like, we need to get rid of the students that are bringing our results down.
I understand.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Now, the last thing I'll say about this specific like for-profit, non-profit dichotomy here is it also changes based off of like the grades that we're looking at. So I've seen that charter schools are most effective in grades like 4 through 8 as compared to grades 9 through 12.
Really?
I've seen that the charter schools are more effective in that middle school age of learning than compared to the 9th and 12th grade, which I think lines up with the Credo study.
Actually, it's the opposite.
Really?
The Credo study has the gains higher for middle and high school than for elementary school.
Okay, no, sorry. This is middle school and high school.
So the Credo the Credo report shows that elementary, middle, and high schools have pretty similar outcomes as far as additional days of learning. But the interesting thing is the multi-level schools that it measured, which are like K through 12, think about that, which have all of elementary, middle, and high, they are really bad. They have really bad outcomes, significantly lower outcomes than the public schools.
Wow.
1 additional day of learning and reading, 20 days negative learning in math.
Oh my God.
So I didn't know why that would be the case.
Right.
Like maybe they're underfunded and need to put students in classrooms with a bunch of other kids that are not their ages, so they can't tailor the education as much as they need to, but I am not exactly sure.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
But this is these 4 things, right? So culture of respect, less money spent on admin, intensive tutoring, longer school days. These are the things that charter schools do differently than public.
Yeah.
I'm leaving out the teacher part because that's going to be the most deeper. That's going to be the most deepest part of this conversation, I think.
Yeah.
So those 4 things, I feel like all 4 of those things could be done by a public school. That doesn't necessarily necessitate charter.
I maybe.
Like the big difference in charter to me is the fact that it's not tied to your location. Like I feel like that's the thing that differentiates a charter from a public school most of all.
To me, it's the experimental aspect. To me, I
The
think
experimental aspect of it.
yes, I think there is something to competition helping some of these charter schools. Like, I think you're right that the other schools could do this, but the teachers at those schools and the administration aren't really incentivized to experiment, to figure out better ways. They're not incentivized to intensively tutor students who are falling behind.
But let me ask you this now. If we're in a situation where charter schools are competing,
Yeah.
and they're competing against each other, isn't that more dangerous and more volatile for the students if they're in a charter school that closes down?
So that actually isn't a problem.
Right.
Charter schools do close fairly often.
Right. So now what happens to those students? Do they lose like a months of learning?
They're just going to get transferred back to their public schools, which is a disruptive process.
Right.
But they don't lose time learning, I don't think.
Well, yeah, technically they don't lose time learning,
No.
but to say that they definitely lose time learning.
Yes.
They don't lose it on paper.
No, they lose days of learning as is measured by Credo, for example.
Right.
Yes. I don't know exactly what those numbers are.
Right, but I feel like that is that's one aspect that I don't like about charter schools at all. The fact like it could close down, uproot a kid's life, all of his friends are gone.
Sure.
That's depressing. I think it does produce negative I definitely would imagine it produces a negative outcome for at least the year that happened.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It feels very much like an economy to me, right?
Yeah.
Where the startups are more likely to fail, but they also innovate in ways that can push their whole industry forward, like to
Yes.
new solutions, to better solutions.
Yes.
Yeah.
But is kids the right place to be doing that experimentation?
Kids are the only place that you can do the experimentation when you're going to be using the methods on kids.
Well, I think the only other way to do it is through research and academia, and then changing your local school through your through your elections to your education board.
But I feel like research and academia can never be as effective. This basically is research and academia.
Well, it's research and academia, except you're playing with kids' lives.
But you can't test this besides on kids. So if you were to do research in academia, you still need to take kids and educate them, in which case you're just doing the same thing.
Yeah, I guess, but I feel like you're using it's not a revamp of the entire school system like charter school seems like it's trying to be. Like charter school seems like it's trying to be an alternative to the entire public school system.
I don't
think
that's true. I mean, maybe
it's not trying to be an alternative. It's trying to be the way to do things. That's what it's trying to grow into.
Are you saying it's trying? Because it sounds to me like you're saying it's trying to displace other public schools.
It's trying to totally displace public schools.
But what is the difference? Like, what if, because a charter school, there could just be a version of a charter school that's like a normal public school.
So now, then this is when it gets interesting. Public schools are run and operated by their local governments. They are responsible directly to their local governments. Charter schools technically aren't. They have a charter, like their own constitution, that they give to the town, and the town accepts that charter, and then it is bound to follow this charter. But the number of regulations imposed by the town are lower. There aren't like school board elections for parents to be involved in the children's education in a charter school the same way that there is in a public school. So there's less public output and input and outreach there.
Yeah.
So those are some big differences.
So I think that's an area for possible reform, because some of the horror stories of charter schools, like some of the times when the worst things have happened, for example, when there are for-profit CMOs that are in control of their operations, things have happened where, because of the charter, if the CMO is fired, or if it's found to like be treating kids the wrong way, they have been able to retain, like they've been able to get equipment from the school as they're fired. Like they're able to take computers from the school because of the charter and stuff like that. So that's where it's like, the idea is school boards should still have not only insight into and visibility of, but final say on important decisions.
Okay.
Like hiring and firing.
But now it seems like you just invented public schools again.
I don't think so, because it's the same. It's like an executive and a product team underneath him.
Okay.
The product team is still figuring out different, like they're trying to develop a new product. But instead, I think public schools are more like an executive and a factory, right? They're not figuring out anything new. They're just producing what's already been designed by the innovators.
If you remove the for-profit charter schools,
Mm-hmm.
what is their incentive to innovate?
I don't know.
So,
but I do know that
if
there are
they-
nonprofits
but
that do.
But if that's the case, and they're not relying on a profit motive to innovate, why can't the innovation take place in the public schooling system?
Because maybe the nonprofit can pay the teachers based on how good they are.
Okay, so now let's get into the main juicy part here.
Sure.
So the fifth part here, why charters are suggested to succeed, is teachers are paid based off of effectiveness and can be fired. Now, explain your position on that a little.
Okay. I think it's pretty simple. So anecdotally, you have a bunch of stories about parents who know about some terrible teacher in their school district who has tenure and is already on a pension plan, and it's super hard for them to be gotten rid of, right? No matter how much they complain about them in parent-teacher meetings, or in meetings with the principal, the teacher is just sticking around. With charter schools, you don't have that problem, where you can get rid of teachers who aren't good for the kids, and you can pay teachers more that are actually specifically better for the kids. Whereas in most public schools in the country, the teachers are represented by a teachers union, which sets pretty equivalent terms, not in that all teachers are paid the same, but teachers tend to be paid based on seniority, and they gain additional benefits based on seniority rather than the merit of kind of the results that they produce as teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I think understanding that that's what your compensation is does make it easier and more likely that you will phone it in. It's not to say that there aren't tons of teachers out there that will not phone it in, that care much more about their job being an important part of our society and way to mold the lives of kids and be motivated simply by that. But I think charter schools cover both of those sides.
I think that there could be reforms where teachers get paid based off of get some bonuses based off of kid performance. I think I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen a lot of evidence that unions hate that idea. I know they aren't pushing for it, but I haven't seen evidence that they hate it. I come from a place where I don't think teachers unions are necessarily the problem, and I don't know if they are. I'm not convinced that they're tied to poor outcomes to students. So I've found some studies that have teachers unions associated with higher standardized test scores than non-teachers unions. I've seen one study that says that a 2011 Wisconsin law that restricted union power reduced average test scores on the state standardized tests by approximately 20% of a standard deviation after the unionization efforts were weakened because a lot of teachers left the state of Wisconsin because they were under threat. I think teachers unions give teachers a better mental stability. The Economic Policy Institute did a study around that and kind of found because the teachers are now more secure and stable, they have less stress, which makes them more focused on the children and less frustrated at the children. I can imagine if my bonus was tied to kids' performance and a kid wasn't giving a shit, I would be so mad at that kid, right? I mean, if my bonus is tied to how well you do and this guy just isn't showing up to class.
I guess. I mean, but another way to say that is I would be so motivated to get that kid's performance to be better.
Yes, and I understand that. But it is definitely fair, and I don't want to totally say that teachers' unions are shown to benefit child outcomes, because I think the Department of Education they had a summary paper, and they even admit, they said the effects of union on student performance is mixed. Students of average ability who attend schools in union districts perform better on standardized tests, whereas low achieving and high achieving students tend to perform worse. So, and they also agree that there is definitely a higher cost to a unionized workforce, unionized teachers, than not unionized teachers.
Yeah. So this is where I think our core discussion, I don't know if it's a disagreement, but if unions aren't, I haven't seen evidence that makes me confident that unions improve performance. There have been, I see mixed results. I've seen some studies that show a slight negative impact of unions. I see a lot of studies that show no impact of unions. But one thing we can agree on for sure is that they cost more.
Yes, they definitely cost more.
Right.
Definitely.
But this turns into then a broader argument about unions, because unions always cost more, right? And we've been pounding the drum for unions in so many other places. So ideologically, I think to me, it's only a problem if the cost going to unions is taking away from what could be the educational gains of the kids. And that's where it seems to me like the charter schools may do better at converting the money invested in them into results for the children.
Now that only happens if they are nonprofits, right?
Yes.
If it's a for-profit charter school, that's not going to necessarily be the case.
Correct.
And in a lot of areas, I don't know the whole breakdown, but in Ohio, for-profit charter schools are more common than nonprofit charter schools.
Okay.
So, like, there needs to be larger charter school reform until that type of policy could be.
I think generally the majority is nonprofit.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I agree that there needs to be reform, but I think there is something to treating, I don't know, this is going to sound so conservative, but that's okay. treating education more like a business. There's something to like allowing for competition. And a lot of the examples, the anecdotes that I've read about how charter schools operate is not like it's cutthroat. There are some that's like, yeah, there's one school that had a got to go list of 16 students who were making trouble and they wanted to basically pressure the parents into withdrawing the kids from the school.
Oh, that's insanity,
yeah,
dude.
Absolutely crazy. So there are horror stories, but then there are stories of teachers who start to work at a charter school and they're like, oh, there's someone in here that observes my teaching consistently. That never happened at my old public school.
Right.
They give me feedback consistently. Like I have ways, they really love you kind of brushed over a little bit the culture of respect for learning and high expectations, but they'll do things that you might think are cheesy, like name the classrooms after colleges that the kids have gone to or stuff. But because a lot of these students are from underprivileged backgrounds, like they've never been in an environment like that, right?
Or an environment that even encourages that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like high expectations, high support is the idea. And to give kids that, to like shape their environment in that way, charter schools kind of provide that opportunity that I think schools that have been embedded into these low income areas for a long time lose, because it almost starts to feel hopeless.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand that. I definitely think that is one avenue where charter schools are better, but I don't know if that's one of the things I don't think is locked to charter schools. Like, I don't think that's a part of the fundamental thing of what being a charter school is.
But why is it better for it not to be in charter schools? You keep answering some of my points with this, right? It doesn't have to be a charter school.
Yeah.
Why should it not be?
I think it shouldn't be a charter school for two reasons. Two reasons off the top of my head. One, charter schools take money away from local public schools, right? So there are fiscal impacts of opening up charter schools. Tax money that could be going to the public school gets diverted and goes to the charter school instead, which means that the public school now has less resources to work with.
See, I would be okay with that argument if there weren't also studies on how charter schools that were in the same areas as the public schools or the other public schools affected performance, and they consistently find no or a small positive effect.
So you're saying that charter schools, when they open next to a public school,
Yes.
there are no effects on that. You have to link me that one.
Okay. There are multiple, but I can find it for you.
You threw in the multiple line on me.
Of course.
God, you bitch.
Yeah.
Okay, you'll link me that because I need to read that.
Okay.
But then, okay, another one that I think is important is talking about the needs of special education students. So kids with special needs are underrepresented in charter schools. So children with disabilities make up about 12.5% of those in traditional public schools, but only make up around 10.6% of those found in charter schools, which means that charter schools it's not necessarily that charter schools is discriminating on special needs students because they're not legally allowed to because they take public funds. They are not discriminating against them, but they're not in charter schools or benefiting the same amount. And because of that, and because of getting less resources due to this problem, the public schools having to subsidize special needs students more than charter schools have to.
This is somewhere where I agree with you.
Yeah.
Because I've seen charter schools are regulated in that they have to take people randomly from a lottery or who apply to them. Mm-hmm. But they're not regulated in how they present themselves to parents who are thinking about applying. Right. So they can put on their website that we do not have the resources to handle kids with severe disabilities.
That's terrible.
Yeah, you can. There are ways, and again, so the charter system isn't perfect. But what if I'll kind of come back with the same question that you are coming at me with?
Yeah.
Why can't we just make charter schools not do that?
Why can't we make charter schools not do that?
Why can't we just make them not do the things that might subtly discriminate?
Because I'll tell you why. I think this is what charter schools are actually about. I think this is a fundamental aspect of charter schools. I think the fundamental thing about a charter school is being less regulated by the government. I think that is one of the fundamental core principles of the charter school.
But they can be regulated in some ways. If you want, we can just have a conversation about, like, this is just about schools. What regulations do we want?
Okay.
What regulations do we not want?
Okay.
So we're saying that we want them to be regulated in that they can't discriminate against people based on disabilities, based on race, based on gender.
We need every school to have the resources to handle all students.
But you can't say, like, that's the same reason you can't give a constitutional right to housing.
But every public school has the capabilities to help special. They're by law, they have to have those resources. Every public school by law has to have the resources to handle special needs students. Charter schools don't have that.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant based on student population.
Oh, no.
That makes sense.
Yes.
I'm done with that.
Okay.
I think the main differentiator is the teachers' unions.
You think that's the main differentiator?
I think you're right. Like, what, or maybe not. Maybe I don't know how restricted, how regulated public schools are in terms of their curriculum. Mm-hmm. We have Common Core as an idea, right? But how much can they waver outside of that? So how do you feel about something like the Common Core?
I love it.
Why?
Because I like a standardized system where every student is given the same opportunity no matter where you are in the country. That's my dream.
But is it the same opportunity, or is it?
It's closer to.
Is it being locked into the same education? Like, is it opportunity, or is it removing opportunity for something different? Because
so you're saying Common Core stifles innovation because different teachers aren't able to experiment, right?
Exactly.
So I understand that mindset, but again, it comes down from my belief that the people who, are masters in education designed Common Core specifically for the purposes, or can design at least a Common Core that is tailored to the needs of the vast majority of students, with little tweaks around the edges being available for, like different crazy circumstances.
Okay.
But if different schools are teaching all their students in different ways, different things, now we're running into a real problem where people across the street from each other are getting vastly different educations.
Why is that a real problem?
Well, because then because then we have a situation where one student could be having a way worse education from another student, and the goal should be to have everyone's education to be exactly the same and good. And so with
I disagree with the exactly the same part. See, I think that's the point of charter schools is that good does not need to be exactly the same.
I think it
And
has to be,
and
because otherwise you're leaving too much room for deviation into the negative.
But okay, well this is a very typical I guess liberal conservative argument. Why let the government choose rather than the parents?
We kind of do. I mean, we vote for people.
But that's a terrible argument.
I know, but what are you saying? You want every?
I'm saying there are charter schools that are specifically targeted the arts. There are charter schools that specifically target math and science. There are charter schools that have gymnasiums with all the amenities, that have sports teams. There are charter schools that don't. There are charter schools with all different kind of types of options. I read one story about a woman with a son who was super into history, and since his school really adhered to the Common Core, he was getting almost nothing to stimulate that or to feed that. And then once he went to a charter school that gave him more of that option, he was super enriched. Like his performance was completely in line with the rest of his class. He wasn't lagging behind at all. I imagine there would be a lot of those stories.
So you want much more
school choice.
Oh my God. But you want more like specific schools.
Not necessarily. Yes. Let's say more specific schools. Not only specific schools.
Right. But you want more specific schools.
Sure. I just want more. I want more different schools. I want more school choice.
You're not concerned that it takes resources away from the public schools?
No, not given the multiple studies I've seen that say it doesn't make them worse.
I had to read that because I don't buy that at all. Because
Okay.
I know that
It's from Brookings.
I know that less funding is going to negatively impact school performance. Like, we know that.
Not really. Like, school funding very loosely correlates with school performance a lot of the time.
Really?
Yeah.
I have not found that. That's
what I have found. And I think it's worth it for like the size of gains that a lot of these schools see, and especially, I don't know, given us here in Boston, this is kind of the center of the effective charter school.
Yeah.
Given the effect on the underprivileged communities, dude. Like that's supposed to be liberals' rallying cry. The fact that liberals are on the wrong side of this is ridiculous to me.
Well, because I think that I'm not fully convinced that the money isn't better spent improving public schools rather than opening up new schools and then locking charter schools to only a subset of the student population. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that it's better for, if you have a school district of 1,000 kids, to open up a new school, only send 100 to that school there. 900 are still trapped in a shitty school. 100 get a good school. I don't think that's a good solution.
It's only not a good solution if the alternative is 1,000 in a good school, and it's not.
What are you talking about?
You're saying 900 in a public school, 100 in a charter school.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, it's not a good solution to have the 900 stay in a shitty public school and the 100 in a good charter school. Well, it's only not a good solution if the alternative is 1,000 kids in a good public school. But that's not usually what the alternative is. The alternative is 1,000 kids in a shitty public school. Because the additional funding from here does not make this school a good public school for the 1,000 students.
So you're saying that only those 100 that get into the charter school. So you're saying it's 1,000 people in a shit public school going to, 1,000 people in a shit public school. You take out 100 and they go to a good charter school.
Yeah, I'm saying,
and you still have 900 shit in the. But don't you see how that's not helping the majority of students? Like, that's my concern here.
I am seeing how that's not helping the majority of students, but I think it's better to help some of the students than none of them.
But I think it would be better to do your best. I think the money could be better spent helping all the 1,000 in other ways.
Or the money could be better spent funding more charter schools.
But that do you think? Can you see how it could how it's inefficient to separate that one public school into like 5 different charter schools.
Only if the money is actually improving the public school.
You're not convinced that increased funding in public schools for certain things improves outcomes?
I think it can, but I don't think
like, don't you think that's more worth it then if you think it can?
No, because I actually think that the gains of the 100 kids that go to the charter school could make the overall gains higher.
When you say overall gains, I don't that's like an issue with mean versus median right there. Because if that happens, then the median student feels no effect. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
The average feels an effect. The median student feels no effect at all.
Sure.
So that just seems like you're picking winners and losers here. And especially it's only through a lottery system. Like it just seems to me like you're just picking out of a hat who gets to succeed or not.
It is a lottery system.
Right.
And it is random. But
right.
But I still think that's okay because I have seen no evidence that not making the charter school is better for the kids of the public school.
So I think our true contention here is, I think more resources going to underprivileged public schools will do more than opening up a charter school.
Yeah, I'm reading the Brookings study right now.
Okay.
Or the Brookings article with studies focusing on charter's effect on overall instructional quality often find no effects, but find positive effects much more often than harm to students on the districts.
Wait, is that on public school districts?
Yes. Good or bad for students in district schools. The inevitable harm narrative has become a rallying cry in teachers' union strikes. But it doesn't actually play out. Studies estimate that in the year after a student transfers to a charter school, anywhere from $1,500 to $3,500 fixed costs must be paid from a shrinking district budget.
Right.
But they rarely find the harm predicted on the basis of district's overall funding and costs to students.
Okay. I'm being hit with this right now, so I have to do more on this.
I mean, the nice thing is I'm showing you 2 paragraphs right now that link like 7 studies.
Yeah.
So I will send this to you. But that's the main thing. Like I get the idea of the concern, but it is so clear to me that at least in some circumstances, like in urban schools that are going to greatly represent underprivileged populations, they can be enormously helpful. And I want more of that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not convinced that the charter school reform specific to charter schools couldn't just be applied to public schools and benefit more people more faster. I'm not convinced that that's the case. I don't think we need to go down the road of changing like this fundamental idea of how we do schooling. Like I think we could make it so that it's not relying on where you live. You know, Florida has a system like that where it's not specific to where you live in your districts, and they're still public schools. I think that's fine. If your issue is with educational restrictions
and teachers unions,
but I want to focus on educational restrictions for a second. What are your thoughts on the Department of Education?
I think it's a good mechanism to redistribute funding for schools.
But the Department of Education has a duty to ensure certain learning standards across the country. And it's because we don't want schools teaching the Bible like it's law.
Sure.
And that was something that would make me nervous about charter schools. Obviously, that's an extreme example because that would break the state.
Exactly. Church and state.
The church and state principle. So I'm not going to, that's an extreme example. But I don't think that we need more restrictions over their curriculum so that it is not going to result in a obscenely worse education from what the standard should be.
Obscenely worse. Well, I think that's somewhere where we can almost trust the market.
Because they're incentive, but okay.
Because parents are still going to choose. and parents aren't going to want to send their kids to somewhere with terrible education.
Parents aren't going to want to send their kid to a place with terrible education. I would have to look. So now, for me to combat that response, I would need to understand which charter schools. I would need to know, does charter school performance, is that a predictive aspect of charter schools closing? I need to know if a charter school being successful actually is correlated with if it stays open or not.
Okay.
And when I say successful, I mean student success.
Sure. Why?
Because that would be my contention there. If you're saying that the market would solve for that problem, I need to know that bad charter schools won't stay on the market.
But if bad, okay, so bad charter schools, okay.
I'm not totally convinced that the turnover of charter schools is completely due to their performance.
Sure.
They could be due to a location, to a bunch of other
That's
reasons.
fair. And it's like, do parents actually choose correctly?
Right.
Okay. But isn't it still better than happening to live in a super poor district and being trapped in a bad public school?
Unless the public school system can reform and you can have non-district specific public schools.
But how much evidence do we need that they can't? How many years of declining results of like less than middle of the pack educational outcomes for the country and for these districts do you need before you're like, let's try something different? Because I think that's what happened.
I think what we need is a stronger standardization program across public schools. I think that's what's failing us. I think we have public school systems that are not teaching what they should be teaching in the right ways.
Why? What makes you think that?
Well, because their test scores are getting worse. But I think it's because we're not controlling how they're teaching the material.
But their test scores are getting worse. Maybe that's because we're giving them too rigid of a framework for which they need to learn the material. And if they had more choice or flexibility in how they were taught, then the test scores would be better. That's my point. I think you're making a conclusion that doesn't have any evidence on its being specifically the conclusion because this is your prior.
Am I totally convinced that declining test scores is specifically because of the way things are getting taught, though? I don't know if I even think that.
I don't think it is what you think. I think you're just saying what's...
No. I don't think I think that. I don't think it's actually... I'm not totally convinced that the standardized test score results, like the declining ACT score, right?
Okay.
That was a big story this last month.
Okay.
ACT scores declined rapidly. I don't know if I'm totally convinced that that's because teachers got really worse this past year.
No, it's probably because there are too many distractions in the classroom.
Right, and I think that's the more fundamental thing about it.
Yes.
I don't know if that has to do with the public school aspect, is what I'm saying.
Or you're saying it doesn't have to do with the restrictions or the regulations on what is taught.
Right.
I think that's fair. I think, again, this is where like the culture of learning, which can be instilled in public schools just as easily as it can in charter schools. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's the whole thing. Maybe the whole culture of charter schools can only, like, it is only that because they feel entrepreneurial about it. They feel like they have the power to change how they develop kids, right?
You know what I need to find out? I wish I had this information off the top of my head. This is what I think we should. I think we should talk about this part here and then end and come back next week and talk about it again a little bit.
Okay.
I want to know who makes more money, teachers in public schools or charter schools. That's the first thing I want to know. I think it's public, but I don't know off the top of my head, so I'm not going to say that. Next, I want to know, do teachers quit more often in charter schools as compared to public? That's something else I want to know.
Quit rather than are fired.
Right. Then I want to know, then I guess I want to get some like either data if I can or anecdotal stories if that's all they have of teachers having to leave charter schools because they're not making enough.
Okay.
Because I think there is a lot of problems with private school teachers in the U.S. that don't make enough money, but are able to work in these private schools because they might not like a private school teacher in Florida or a private school teacher in just don't make enough money to sustain themselves. If they're getting paid the same amount as a charter school, right? If that's more equal to that, I think that's a serious problem for teacher turnover rates, which I think would impact kids poorly too. So, but I don't know that. But that's what I would need to see. I think I need to see more information about that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Did you follow?
I think so. Like if teachers make less at charter schools,
Yeah,
than they do at public school, than other public schools.
How does that impact the teachers' lives? Does it make them quit more? Does it make them less motivated? Does it bring in worse teachers? I want to know that. Like, is a salary increase better at bringing in better talent? Does a higher salary bring in better talent?
Okay.
I would think yes.
Of course.
But what do you think?
I think that the salary increase is one thing to think about, but I also think if I were a teacher, I would feel more incentivized and excited about my job if I wasn't teaching to a Common Core, if I felt like my performance could affect my salary, even if my salary is lower right now.
I do agree that performance should affect your bonus or something for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely think that.
Yeah.
No, I definitely think that. I think that would be a good change.
And the nice thing about this story or the anecdote of like having someone observe your teaching is that a performance bonus or a salary based on performance doesn't just have to be based on test scores, right? Someone can observe how you do your job and then give you a performance incentive, give you a raise or a bonus based on what they observe rather than just the numbers that pump out. Because I do think the idea of just teaching to the test is something that is a criticism that's been levied against charter schools a lot of the time.
Yeah. I don't know if I don't agree with that criticism.
No?
To be honest. Like I don't mind the idea of teaching for a test because they're learning it. And the test is designed to teach them the right things. I'm not totally convinced that teaching for the test is like a very, very bad thing.
I don't like the idea of teaching to a test because I'm a person who was able to teach myself to a test extremely well.
Right.
And didn't learn because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Seems like a good place to end.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.